If I walk in the pathway of duty, if I work to the close of the day, I shall see the great King in his beauty. When I've gone the last mile of the way, when I've gone the last mile of the way, I'll rest. I said I'll rest. I'm gonna rest. I'll rest at the close of the day. And I know there are joys, Lord, waiting for me when I've gone the last mile of the way. As I traveled on my journey, few and far
Welcome to
between.
Plain Talk About Life in the Bible. We're going to continue tonight in this series on Pilgrims' Progress, and I hope you're enjoying it. I know I do. It means a lot to me. There's so many lessons from this book, and if you haven't got all the background material, just go back to the go to the website and find the first one, and I'm sure I gave plenty of background on Bunyan in this book in the first lesson in the series. Now, just a minute ago, John has put up for you this picture of Mr. Worldly Wise Man. And the last time we were in this book, we were talking about Mr. Worldly Wise Man. And I was trying to say to you, you saw in the picture, he's pictured as a big, heavy-set, kind of a luxurious gentleman. And I think that's probably true. He eats well. The other day my wife said to me the old expression, do you live to eat or do you eat to live? And I spent most of my 58 years, living to eat. Now I'm trying to learn to eat to live, but I need the help of this wonderful wife of mine to get that done. But Mr. Worldly Wise Man obviously always wants to make heaven on earth. And if you're a Christian sitting out there, that you're very tempted to do that. You forget that you're a pilgrim. You forget that you're a stranger in this land and that you have a homeland. We tend to think that we can have heaven on earth and heaven in heaven. And I'm going to tell you, there's only been a handful of men probably who've ever lived that God's willing to have live luxuriously here without them falling into a pit over it, and also then to be in heaven. It's not the normal course. Bunyan will make the Christian life here not only a pilgrimage, but he'll call it a going uphill. And is it true that it's uphill all the way to heaven? It certainly is. Our life is full of trouble as Christians. The minute one storm blows over, another one blows in. Now, if you don't like that, you have to understand that that's good for you. It's good that it works that way. Why? We tend, when all the weather is calm and the sun is shining and the sky is blue and all's right with our world, we tend to forget our God. We tend to think this is a pretty great place to live. So, just like in the book, we need to be reminded by constant attacks and troubles and trials and tribulations and afflictions that this isn't home, that we are going home, and that we need to long to go home, and that wise men long to go home. In this book, Mr. Worldly Wiseman treats our friend Christian, our hero, rather shabbily. If you remember briefly, when Christian's troubled with the sin that he's committing and has committed, the man sends him to a town of morality to deal with Mr. Legality, who has a son named Civility. Now, the reason that Bunyan talks about it that way is when he was himself converted, he started going to church, and as he said, everybody thought very well of him. The ladies wondered at his reformation. He was now a new man. Well, he wasn't a new man. Remember, you're a new man when you're born again. The Bible says you must be born again in John chapter 3. Jesus himself says that. You must be born again. Okay? You have to be born over. You can't enter your mother's womb again, but you need to have your nature redone. So Bunyan realized, after a couple of years in his own experience, that going to church wasn't his conversion. Going to church, folks, isn't the answer. It's the way to find the answer, but it's not the answer. If you simply go to church and expect that to be your answer when you see the Maker face to face, you'll be disappointed, discouraged, and dismayed shortly in that order. Now, what does it do then? Why does God provide the church? Well, God provides the church, and in this book he calls it the Palace Beautiful, as a place to encourage and refresh pilgrims on their way. That's what the church does. It's a group of people. It's not the building. When you talk about going to church, you need to think in your mind that you're going to meet with other people. That's the church. The church is everywhere. There's a visible church that you're going to meet with. There's an invisible church today that includes me, includes you if you're a true believer. It includes Moses and Aaron and Paul and James and John and Stephen. All these people who are now in heaven already have preceded us. They're part of the same church that we're a part of, the church of the firstborn. You see, now we got there by being born again. Now, we didn't get there by going to church. And I say that because in this case, in Bunyan's book, the law, the Ten Commandments, in this case he's talking about, the law started to show Bunyan what he was. That he was a liar, a cheat, a thief, an adulterer, an envier, whatever else is in that. You know, all of the things are comprised, really. All the sins that you can commit are comprised one way or another in those Ten Commandments. He didn't love God with all of his heart. So he went to church. Now, here's what happens with the law. And it's a funny thing. The law has two different things that can happen to it. If you see somebody and say to them, the law says to love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength, and your neighbor as yourself, or one of those kind of things, which is a compilation of the law, really, as Christ presented. People will actually say to you, well, okay. Right? No, not okay. See, it's not okay. You don't love God with all your heart, mind, soul, and strength. You don't, when the law says not to have any other God before me, well, you don't follow that. I don't follow that. The law then accuses me. If I weren't guilty, it wouldn't hurt. The problem is, I'm guilty, so it hurts. I'm guilty of the law. If you remember in James 2, it says if you stumble on one part of the law, you're guilty of transgressing the entire law. So now I'm guilty of 1,000 things. What do I do with my guilt? Well, if you're the Christian in this story, you have the guilt on your back, looking for someone to take that burden away. In this case, Mr. Worldly Wiseman sends him to the town of morality and tells him just to clean up his act, which is exactly what Bunyan did by going to church. And all that really means is the law, instead of being something that accuses you, pierces you, wounds you, and sets you on the right path to finding deliverance, it becomes something you polish yourself with. A man called me today. I won't say who he was. He's a friend of mine. Said, well, Bill, you'll be proud of me. I'm starting to go to a little church, only I'm going to tell you right off, I don't have any use for it, really. My wife's got me going, and I don't believe any of it, to be honest with you. And I said, well, in the first place, I know you're not being completely honest because the Bible maintains that everybody knows that God exists. So I already know you're lying to yourself and you're lying to me. So much for your honesty. He said, well, went into this argument about why, this and that and blah, blah, blah. And I said, look, if you want to remain a non-Christian, go ahead and go to Bible study. It won't kill you. Go to church and sit there for an hour on Sunday morning. But for heaven's sake, don't pick up your Bible. If you pick up that Bible, you're liable to find out exactly what you are. And he said, when you talk like this, I get this feeling you don't think I'm just basically a good guy. And I said, well, you're not basically a good guy. You might be my friend. You might be a reasonable person to deal with in this planet, but for goodness sake, the Bible tells me that you're born in sin. You're a terrible liar. You're a cheat. You already told me every time you mention your wife, it's always about what she can do for you. It's never about what you can do for her. You're not really truthful. And he said, well, Bill, I don't know if I like that. I said, well, I'm not trying to ask you to like it. I'm just trying to show you that if you want to remain a heathen, if you want to remain a rebel all your life, don't pick that Bible up. Just go to church and let them tell you how wonderful it is you go to church. Going to church, folks, will not change you unless the preacher has the word blessed by God. I will say that. But just going to church and putting in your time, does God really need that from you? He has better things and better people in this world than that. So if you've gone, I had a lady tell me, I've gone 70 straight years to Sunday school, never missed a Sunday. I said, well, did you learn anything? What do you think? There's going to be merit badges for attendance in heaven? Come on, folks. This is your life that's at risk. So your soul's best interest is served by the Bible. If you intend to do your soul harm, if you intend to throw your life away, stay away from the Bible. That's that simple. The Bible and a bad life don't mix. Okay? Don't do it. If you have a Bible and you want to go to church, make sure you don't open it. Then you can stay just like you are. But if you start opening that Bible, it'll change you. The same way it changed me. The same way as it's changed men through the centuries. So that's what happens to our man Christian. He gets sidetracked in the town of morality. But he sees the law and it makes him nervous. And just when he doesn't know what to do, his old friend the evangelist comes up and says, what are you doing here? Why aren't you going the way I showed you? And he kind of reproves him for it. And then he finally ends this little section with this from Galatians chapter 6. No, it's not Galatians chapter 6. It's Galatians chapter 1. And he says to him, have you really started down this path and been so quickly turned aside? That's really what he's saying. What happened? How did you get bewitched? What happened to you? And I'll leave you with that because our man is properly chagrined, ashamed, and reproved. And he moves on from here, but not without some pain. And that's the way it ought to be. If you're that person and you started right, you opened that Bible, God opened it to you, God drew you in, you went to a good church, you got preached to properly, and somewhere you ran into Mr. Worldly Wise Man, and he starts taking you down a path that tells you how wonderful you are on the outside. Aren't you just the most perfect? And can you imagine those other people like Bill Moore who still sin? Listen, you need to recognize your worldly wise man may be named Evans, or he may be named, some other kind of common name, Brown or Smith or whomever it is. He's Mr. Worldly Wise Man to you. You need to go over and slap him. You need to run away from him, get away from the town of morality, get away from Mr. Legality. He'll only fail you at the final judgment. Don't go for it now. Take my warning. Run.